Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in with My Hero Academia chapter 332, State-of-the-Art Hypersonic Intercontinental Cruise. What a dumb title. Anyway, hey everybody, what's up? So, the chapter is here, and I gotta say, if you saw my spoiler video, I was kind of concerned about those powers. I still do have some concerns, between talks with other commenters, and then also seeing this chapter, it's again one of those moments where the chapter itself is much better than the translations, because I do think when you look at it, again, the author is pretty smart about some spots. I do think that he is perhaps being let down at some spots because of the translation, and just with this particular power, the semantics are really finicky, and this is a chapter that actually acknowledges the semantics being finicky, but I appreciate it for that. But anyway, yeah, 332, we're going to go through it. Overall for the chapter, I gotta tell you, I am really happy for it because it's not going to take too long to talk about, because a lot of the chapter is just wordless pages and just damage depiction. You know, you guys know me. I'm not the kind of guy that really cares all that much about the art. It's just not what I care about. I care about the information density. And because of that, I do think that this chapter ends up being a little bit bloated in the sense that it's, you know, those textless pages. But that's just my personal style and likes. Overall, for the length of a video, I really appreciate that it's short. But mind you, I will try to make the video long anyway. Are there any big points that I want to talk about? No, I think all my points are kind of locked to the pages that they're on. I will do my best to make sure I tell you everything that I'm thinking about a page. When it comes to the powers, though, when we get to the page about that, that's going to be the spot where I kind of spend a bit more time on, just because the power stuff is what I'm more interested in. And then we'll talk about, well, to what degree does this even matter when it comes to New Order. Anyway, with that out of the way, do I have anything else left to say? I know that there's been people saying that, thinking like, oh my god, how is Shigaraki gonna lose? And it's like, bro, we already know that Shigaraki's gonna be saved. We know where this is going. But really, the stuff that we saw here in terms of Shigaraki surviving, honestly, this is more of the same. It's actually really surprising to hear that people are concerned about how Shigaraki is going to go down. The moment that Shigaraki survived Endeavor's pretty much crispy treatment, yeah, the destruction that we see here in terms of Shigaraki with those missiles, it doesn't look as bad as what Endeavor did. Like, nothing has fundamentally changed. It's actually funny, because there's something in the chapter that points to another conclusion about how those missiles would have been effective, if anything. And when we get there, we'll talk about it. But anyway, let's go into chapter 332 and my interpretations, starting with page 1. Now, on the spoilers, page 1 was one that ultimately kind of confused me. Just, I get like the idea of it, and it makes sense in the idea of like, oh yeah, like My Hero Academia still has kind of regressive ideas. But when you look at the page 1 in the proper translation, this page is really interesting for a lot of reasons. Like, the first half, interesting for Star, because it might have to do with next week. Second half, though, is extremely interesting, with the third of the 4 panels being the one that really cements how bad of a thing this whole thing was. So let's just go with the first half of that first page. The idea that Star wasn't the greatest at boosting her quirk, and that there is a hard limit when it came to powering herself up. So this in general is just, if you take this page by itself, like, this honestly doesn't make that much sense. We already knew that she was not able to reach All Might's strength, but then bringing it up that there is this little extra bit about her character where she was actually really worried about it was interesting. Now with page 2, I do think it makes more sense, but it's interesting how this went down. Now overall, interesting to know that there were problems when it came to powering herself up, or there was always a hard limit. It would be cool to kind of learn what the hard limit is, but sure. We then go into this next little bit that says, at the end of the day, quirks reflect what's on the inside. Maybe after all, it's because Cassie is a girl. Okay, the girl comment, regressive, whatever, that's pretty dumb. You know, my opinion, in a quirky world, that doesn't make sense. But when you have the lines before that, at the end of the day, quirks reflect what's on the inside, that actually makes a lot more sense. Because now, that kind of logic is insane. In the series of My Hero Academia, that kind of logic, we gotta be very careful with it. The thing is, there are some logics in the world that are very tough because sometimes they are correct. You know, you might say this about stereotypes. Sometimes stereotypes are correct. That's why they end up becoming stereotypes. And this is one of those lines that does this. So I'm going to give you an example. Quirks reflect what's on the inside. You can say that for La Brava. La Brava's quirk, well, actually, Now it's an issue of chicken and the egg. I'll be very careful. But La Brava, at the end of the day, ends up with a predisposition that might be severely influenced by her quirk. That's very possible. Another person that you can say this about is Toga. But on the other end of the spectrum, at the end of the day, quirks reflect what's on the inside. This statement by itself says that quirks are a manifestation of an inherent quality. And then when you apply this to someone like Shinzo, well, Shinzo's been a victim of this because people look at his quirk and they say, well, like, you're kind of villainous, aren't you? You can also apply this to the mutant shapes, which is, I think, a lot more appropriate for the current era of Hero Academia, where the mutant shapes, they look monstrous because they are monsters on the inside. So the entire thought itself is extremely troublesome, and this kind of thinking has led to negative things in the story of Hero Academia. So when it comes to the structuring of this, I like how the author did it because this line of thought is already set. Well, this is a pretty stupid line of thought. Not even just because in a world of superpowers, that's kind of a nonsensical statement, but also in terms of Hero Academia's internal logic, this line of thought is not good. Imagine saying that Shoji is a terrible person because he looks like a monster on the outside. Heck, it might have been the way people react to his quirk that made him a terrible person if he ends up being the traitor. Anyway, page 2 comes in and it gives a lot more context. And it's just pretty much saying that, yo, Star's bros are real bros. And it also plays into the dynamic about how these guys are pretty much the Star support crew. So, overall with page 1 and 2, what you have to understand, this is again another page of like establishing, oh hey guys, look, this character that you guys know for like what, 4 chapters now, she has really cool comrades in arms. These guys are pretty cool. Yes, I know the idea that these guys are ready to die along with Star. Yes, I know the idea that Star said that she would die together with these guys. Yeah, you know, everything that we saw in the previous chapters, I don't think you guys got the message enough, so I'm just going to reiterate it for you. I appreciate it, author. It's cool to know that they were cool with her. But this is, again, the author's tactics. Just build up the relationship between them in a flashback right before the chapter, and then play on that relationship within the confines of the chapter. Cool stuff. So page 3, we see the Tiamat approaching. We have that line of what Star is going to try to do. Then we have Star pretty much telling the reader what's going to be undone and what's going to be the problem here. So lasers coming off, and then lasers coming off, those guys are going to have to pick up Star's slack and keep Shigaraki in place. So that leads in from page 2 to page 3, just pretty much establishing why it is that Star trusts them to do that. Okay, cool stuff. Really appreciated it. This is probably a really easy to understand chapter when it comes to that progression there. From there, we transition to Shigaraki pretty much analyzing the entire situation. And that leads us to page 4. So first panel, page 4, Shigaraki is pointing out that the laser is only meant to stun lock him. I wonder if that's a flourish for the English translation, but I do like saying stun lock because that is very gamey. We then have Shigaraki pointing out that she must know his capabilities, and he is able to infer because of that she's waiting for something. So pretty good guess. In the second panel of the 4th page, we have them saying that they are going to keep his hyper regen busy. In other words, they're going to be blasting him. Keep this in mind. Keep in mind what they were saying they were going to do while she switches over. Anyway, it all leads to Shigaraki and Star's people pretty much saying that it's going to be a shitty game of hot potato. I don't know hot potato that well, so I'm just going to leave that there. Like, I'm sure that makes sense for everyone that knows hot potato, but I'm pretty sure I think I know what a hot potato game is, but like I don't know if that was like the best comparison, but I'm not going to complain about it. Like, you know, whatever, it works for the situation. I do think it's funny that Star's people and Shigaraki had the same thought. They all landed on the same game, but okay, moving on. Page 5 is one of the first pretty much useless pages when it comes to rhetoric and any kind of stuff. It's just pretty much cool stuff going on, just people getting ready. I will say that for telegraphing or for making sure the reader understood what exactly was going on, I think the page is really important. So props to that. Also, we'll point out on page 5, it looks like we have 10 Tiamats, just from what I'm counting here. Anyway, page 6 is the first of, okay, the author was a lot better than the spoilers suggested, which I really appreciated. We have Star grabbing the 10 missiles with her giant. We then have the second panel where we see that wonderful little tap, so really appreciated. And I really love, because this is where I was definitely going to have a lot of problems with it, but we have Star flat out saying as long as the rule applies to even a single missile. So it's pretty much, as long as the rule applies to a single missile, it will apply to all of them. So I had a wonderful discussion with White Despair and other commenters, and I want to make sure I properly said that out loud. Okay, so I'm going to break this down from the way I see it. Personally, I feel there's a fundamental difference between touching the atmosphere and touching, like, say, converging lasers. Because, to me, conceptually, if you put lasers together, you can't distinguish between the two lasers put together. They ultimately meld, right? Similarly, if you have 2 glasses of water, you pour 1 glass of water into the other, can you actually tell the boundary between the 2 portions of water? Not really. With missiles, you can tell the separation. And I will just go on to say, like, when it comes to Hero Academia, the quirks that always give me like conceptual troubles are the ones that are able for some reason to identify the boundaries of an object. So this is just more of the same when it comes to that. But honestly, in the grand scheme of things, all that really matters is that everything stays consistent. If the author is saying that applying one rule to a missile affects all of them, then sure. Okay, I like that. I like that he said that because it means that he himself acknowledged how weird this looked. So really appreciate that. I do think that's smart. And in the grand scheme of things, if Star's quirk isn't coming back, it honestly doesn't matter. He can make up a bunch of more really troublesome rules, but if the quirk itself isn't in the series beyond this point, there's going to be less opportunities fundamentally for the rules to be broken. Personally, I feel that this is very dangerous when you have this type of power. But again, what makes these type of powers dangerous is the consistency as you go into the future of the series. As long as this power ends here and he doesn't have to challenge it, and he doesn't have to weaken it to make it work, it'll be fine. And in terms of, like, just to give you the sense, like, we know that the author already has some pretty busted up powers, and we know some powers, the way that they work has been slightly rewarded over time. Like Aizawa's power was still getting little details filled in as far as Overhaul's arc, when it came to how it actually applies to mutant shapes. That being that Aizawa's power pretty much prevents people from using their mutant shape capabilities if they have like an extra limb or something like that. Anyway, I do think there is something interesting here if you were trying to decipher exactly what is the mechanism by which this is legal, that being one missile applies to them all. And I think there might be I think he might be pointing towards one direction here. It's possible that Tiamat, so a critical thing here is that she's able to identify a single missile, but when she says the rule, she says Tiamat is redirected. It's possible, and this would make sense of what he's given us before. You have to understand that when it comes to this quirk, there is a fundamental difference between how inanimate objects are treated and objects with sentience are treated. It's possible that Tiamat is only Tiamat when there are, for instance, 10 missiles coming together. It's possible that only one of the Tiamat missiles is conceptually not Tiamat. So if the author goes down the direction saying like, hey, this is how this works, would that be terrible beyond exploitable concerns? No, not really, because Star's power already affects really metaphysical things. For instance, the fact that the power interfaces with the degree to which someone recognizes their name is already pretty deep conceptually. So when you have a situation where Star is able to essentially dictate what an object is in her head, and is able to apply that concept, and then the power reacts to the concept that Star has, this kind of stuff is okay. Again, what we have to be looking for is any situation in the future where if this power is still active, where some kind of stupid thing comes up that prevents multiple objects that are the same from being affected by the rule. Overall, though, I think this is a really good page for the author, just because I like that he actually, again, when you see these little moments, it's 100% the author knows how weird something looks, and you gotta appreciate it when it comes. Anyway, page 7 is where we see the nomu coming out, and we have Star's crew firing at the nomu. Now, what I want to say here is, remember, those guys think the nomu is Shigaraki. That's what they're doing. Everyone thinks this is Shigaraki, okay? Then we go into page 8 and 9. Thankfully, like pretty much a wasted page for the purposes of analyzing. It looks cool. It's damage depiction. Don't care. Because damage depiction doesn't really matter until you see the body. Page 10 is just another damage depiction page. All that it really tells us is that Endeavor is not going towards Star. He now knows where it is because he should be able to see that little blip on the radar over there. Will Endeavor show up to save Star next week? Who knows? But we know that he is at least right now 50 kilometers away, I believe. Like they gave us a number, whatever number they gave us before. Page 11 is another textless page. We just see Star being blown away. We see the crater. And in the crater, you can see the little hole. You have Star noticing the hole. So in terms of the damage here, that crater is pretty deep. I don't know the power of ballistics, but don't worry. There's something else in the chapter that really tells us how weak Tiamat is. We go to page 12, which is just this wonderful face of Shigaraki. Again, the author really loves showing Shigaraki off. You know, hyper regen really does so much for the author, because with hyper regen he can legitimately hurt villains however much he wants, give readers that shock value, but then repair it. And the author does like doing shock value. I still remember the day he cut off Shoji's arm, because Shoji is the only student that could afford to lose an arm. So he's really good at making use of this type of stuff. Alright, we go back to page 13, which is now finally more stuff to decipher here. So first we have a reminder Shigaraki can control what decay affects. That's pretty good. Then we go into the thing where he just acknowledges he knew that something was coming, and because he knew that new order can only affect 2 things at once, with now the new rule being that a thing could also refer to a group of things, so it's not really 2 things, it's 2 things, accepting that one thing may be many things that is the same type of object. Anyway, moving on. I think the next panel was really good, because I was kind of wondering like what exactly was the timing here, because I was about to call the author out on it, but Shigaraki goes in and says that the instant that he noticed the shift, so this was a really cool explanation panel, where the moment that the laser fizzles out, that's when Shigaraki thinks that's the time. And I love that the author again was very aware of this and said if he ran away earlier, she might have figured it out. So that's good. I like that. That's really smart on Shigaraki. That's saying Shigaraki is really careful of Star. That's really respectful. I think that was a really good move. Thank you, author. You have another, it was a gamble line, and then you had seconds delay would have been a fatal error. Now, there's a few things to keep in mind on this line. The first 2 portions were really good, but then these last 2, it was a gamble, and a seconds delay would have been a fatal error. It was a gamble. If you look at this fight was premised on the idea of high risk, high reward. And if you look at it, look in the previous chapters how often Shigaraki said that he's been making gambles. With how much he is gambling here, if Shigaraki went to a casino, he would have pretty much come up with $5 billion on the slots. Moving on, the final part here, the second delay would have been a fatal error. I don't think so. I legitimately don't think that would have been a fatal error. It wouldn't have been as fatal as you're making it sound. But mind you, Neo Shigaraki's been saying that he could have died if Star was a little bit stronger, which I also severely doubt. Now here's where we come into the critical thing. The pilots are pointing out that he used the nomu as a decoy. And we go into page 14, and we see that the nomu is still there. You might be wondering, why am I pointing attention to the nomu? Well, guys, if the near-high-end nomu is still standing even after Star and her pilots thought it was Shigaraki, what does that mean about the missiles that hit it square in the face? The nomu is still there, and as far as we can tell, it still seems to be functioning enough that it can receive a signal from Shigaraki. When you see the now burst that leads into the explosion of the nomu, the little lightning behind it implies that's the radio wave signaling the nomu. So please, everyone, tell me. These people thought that was Shigaraki. Star likely aimed for the spot where the lasers were hitting. If the nomu is still alive, likely meaning that it can still regen, were those missiles actually capable of vaporizing Shigaraki? Those missiles, given that the nomu is alive, those missiles, it is very fair to say, would not have vaporized Shigaraki. So, when Shigaraki is even able to dig deeper into the earth, and mind you, when you look at the crater, you can see that likely Shigaraki had dug very deep into the earth before the crater happens, right? So he went beyond the extent of the crater even. Given that the nomu could survive point blank, Shigaraki getting any form of distance pretty much guaranteed that he was going to survive. Yeah, no man, those missiles couldn't take down a near high-end nomu. Shigaraki's fine. Legitimately, there was not that much risk to Shigaraki. At best, for Star, he would have been stunned for a little bit, for her to maybe take them down. I really do think that letting the nomu be alive enough to be able to take an order really makes those missiles look like a joke. Guys, let me know what you thought down below about those missiles. Anyway, we go into page 15 of like Shigaraki saying he's going to make better use of their resources. You know, honestly, I don't think Shigaraki or All For One are like the poster boys of making use of their resources or making better use of their resources. I mean, like, you have All For One just kind of throwing lackadaisically all those different villains at Izuku without any real plot behind it other than I'm going to keep you distracted. Then you have like also All For One leaving behind Makia, the doctor, and Compress, saying that it's going to be a punishment for Shigaraki. Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't think they're the poster boys for making better use of resources. I do like that he actually did make better use of the jets, because it's pretty funny that, you know, they were trying to give Star a hand, but they ultimately end up giving Shigaraki a hand. Although, mind you, like, this whole thing has been pretty much the story of how Shigaraki gets a hand from Star. Anyway, you have the one guy in the jet saying that this is the time, take him out right there. You have Star remembering how these guys are like her true family. And the guy is saying that, actually, you know, it is really funny that he's saying that Shigaraki's going to die if this one little jet blows up. That is legitimately 100% funny. Because it's like, this guy survived your nuke, and by the time he grabs Star, he's regened enough. You really think you're going to have a higher payload than a missile that couldn't take out a Nomu? Like, it's funny. It's nonsensical too. Also, I want to point out, it looks like Star's standing in the chest of her giant. So, did they actually need to make a foothold for Star? Could she not just kind of ride the palms of the giant? Given that this thing is solid and can hit Shigaraki, likely she could stand in it. It looks like she is standing in it. Okay, not going to complain. Anyway, going to the final page of page 17, where Shigaraki ever so lovingly embraces Star's face. Now, look, man, for 16 and 17, honestly, I'm not going to criticize this. I'm not going to comment on this page to any significant degree, because do I think it is silly that this girl that came in saying like, I'm gonna take your remains back home, brothers, and then saying like, if we die together, brothers. Do I think it's silly that ultimately this girl that came in with the idea that she was super patriotic and would do stuff for her country, do I think it's funny that she ultimately was hit by sentimentality? Yes, I do think it's rather funny. Do I think it's funny that she thought, hey, you know, I'm not going to kill this guy because I know the guy in that jet. No. I will let him get to me so that the guy in the jet might later fall to an even worse death at Shigaraki's hand. Do I think that's funny? Yes, mildly. But, yeah, this is just one of those moments that really is going to be vindicated by the future type of thing. And, you know, the thing is, it's a cliffhanger. It's a this author is the same author that had a mansion blow up and then had everyone survive the next chapter without showing how they survived. One of those people being a guy that's literally made out of wood. I don't trust the author when it comes to cliffhangers. I'm actually half thinking that for some reason next week a bunch of heroes from the author's old series are going to show up and they're going to save Star. You know, very likely. There's nothing that says that this cliffhanger isn't a fake out. The author does fake outs. So because of that, and all things considered, it's like, I'm not gonna comment on these last two pages. I think it's ridiculous. One thing I will say, though, is that this whole thing with Star, this is pretty much the story of a character going from 100 to 0. That's what this is. No matter how you look at it, it's like that fact is permeating every scene in this thing. We started off with the idea this is the strongest woman in the world. And what do we end up here in this chapter? We have this girl feeling sad that she can't be as strong as All Might. We had the strongest woman in the world and we slowly chipped away at her. Even her rhetoric gets chipped away at. Starts off saying like, yeah guys, we are doing this. This is our duty. You guys die. Respect. Gonna take your remains to, oh, I'm gonna die together with you guys. If we go down, we all go down together. To now, oh, I'm not gonna kill you guys. I can't bring myself to kill you. I'll let the villain kill you instead, right? And similarly, like, it happens to Tiamat as well. We go in with like, oh man, wow, missiles, and then we have and then this chapter we find out, oh, these missiles can't even kill a Nomu. Excellent, right? No matter how you look at it, this was the story of 100 to 0, which legitimately makes me kind of concerned for Star next week. This was a story of 100 to 0, pretty much showing all the ways in which the strongest woman in the world can't compete with the strongest villain in the world. Not only was her strength affected, but also the rhetorics that came in with her, and also the supports that came in with her. Now, you know, will the author kill this character next week? Honestly, I hope not. Like, we're all thinking it. We all hope that she's able to pull on a rule that says, like, oh, I can't be decayed, or my quirk can't be stolen, because that would be pretty awesome. I really don't want to believe that the author thinks it's okay to just dust her like this, because this has been just a really bad showing, man. If this really is the story of how Japan was left alone by the rest of the world, this is gonna suck, man. So I'm gonna actually hold out that Star's going to be okay here. Because I just can't imagine this guy dusting her, man. I gotta say, though, this is one of those moments where if he does dust her, aside from the optics of it, I can't say I really care. Because at that point, if you're gonna introduce a character just to have her be a power measuring stick, pretty much a plot device. If you're going to introduce her with the purpose of being a tool, why should I care about her as a person, right? But again, this is one of those things where we have to wait for the future. The future is what's going to dictate the worth of this whole thing. Because once we know what the author wanted to do with this, we can properly criticize the purposes of this arc and say whether or not this was actually well executed. Anyway, guys, let me know what you thought down below. Till next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.